A ton of fuss has been made over Sonic the Hedgehog's 30th anniversary this week, and as he is Sega's current mascot, it makes a lot of sense for all the commotion. Unfortunately, this means that hardly anyone is talking about the fact that Sega's prior mascot is celebrating his 35th anniversary in 2021. Yes, every time that Sonic hits a 5-year anniversary, Alex Kidd is doing so as well to much less fanfare. Fortunately, the tides have turned somewhat by way of Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX, a remake of the very first Alex Kidd game from 1986 released on the Sega Master System. The publisher gave me a review code so I can talk to you about it early, though I do want to say I purchased a physical copy for myself. As someone who started gaming around the turn of the century, I'm not the person to tell you about how this game feels to someone who loved Alex Kidd growing up. And if this game is somehow ruining his legacy, I won't be able to tell that either. Quite conversely, I've always struggled to enjoy Alex Kidd in Miracle World. As a fan of Sega, I respected it for what it was, but I was never able to couple that with a sincere enjoyment of the game. So what I wanted to know going in here was, will this remake finally get me on board and enjoy Alex Kidd? Let's dig in here. So while this is a Sega property, it isn't coming from Sega themselves. They've licensed the property out to Merge Games to be developed by Jankenteam, who are primarily just a couple fans of Alex Kidd. I actually remember back when this was just a fan project. You can read this interview on a certain-kind-of-gamer.com from the developers, and I guess Sega saw it and liked it enough to put a ring on it. Looking at the game here, it's really easy to understand why, too. From start to finish, the game boasts incredibly pleasing pixel art, with an adorable interpretation of Alex running through a variety of game environments that either flesh out what the original pixel art was trying to convey, or by putting their own spin on it entirely. Extra effects like foreground lighting pull weight to help the whole thing feel like a fuzzy, nostalgic dream. It's a night and day difference with the original art style when juxtaposed. Hey, speaking of, you know how games like the Master Chief Collection and the Dragon's Trap remake let you switch to the old graphics with a button press? Yep, Miracle World DX lets you switch to a version of this game done in the original style with a push of the right trigger. Music, sound effects, and visuals all revert back, so if you ever want to compare or just want to play the game again like this, you are able to. The aesthetics are always the immediate concern when it comes to a remake, and for my money, they've knocked it out of the park here. I really enjoyed seeing each new level and looking at how they adapted the original levels to their new style. It's a consistently delightful game to behold. Now, I will say a couple times the artistic ambition did get in the way of the gameplay. Quite literally, sometimes added foreground elements obscured enemy projectiles, for example. It's only for the screen here, but getting hit by an object you didn't see coming may prove frustrating with Alex Kidd's one-hit life system. The other instance I can recall immediately is this section in a cave. I wasn't sure why I wasn't able to jump here, but then I realized there was a layer of this cave roof I was sitting against that was blending into the background a bit, in my eyes at least. Swapping to the original visuals made this readability error non-existent and quite obvious, but certainly less so in the new presentation. I do think both of these instances are minor, all that said, but are worth pointing out as little hiccups in an otherwise immaculate package. It's the kind of thing that pops up, makes you go, huh? Well, alright. And then you remember it for every playthrough afterward. There are some other additions that aid the presentation here too. The story setup of Alex Kidd is that the evil Janken the Great has taken over the land of Miracle World, locked up the prince and his fiancée, and turned many other residents to stone. So a really neat thing this remake does is add in some frozen NPCs that give some flavor dialogue when you speak to them. They're very unintrusive and help offer a bit of context and chuckles on occasion. It's charming. These are even present when you switch back to the retro graphic style too, redone in an interpretation of the Master System style. As for how the game plays, well, to my knowledge it feels very, very close to the original game. As far as the fundamentals go, Alex moves around quickly with an incredibly slippery jump. He has a very fast, short-ranged punch to help him break blocks to find money and also to defeat enemies. Alex learned the art of shellcore, which is not only my favorite alternative metal genre, but a style of martial arts that lets the user grow their fist to whatever size they want for fights. I only wish he punched at about twice the size he currently does, so I'd feel a bit safer fighting enemies. Alex also has a very short crouch, which I didn't find very useful, but he sure can do it. Alex has a single hit point to his name. Touching an enemy, getting hit by an enemy projectile, or touching lava, or presumably poisonous goop, will send him to heaven immediately. He can also swim in underwater sections, never needing to pop up above water to breathe, thankfully. Oddly, I like playing the underwater sections much more as I feel Alex's controls work much better there. I found it rather difficult to get used to platforming as Alex. I was always anxious about landing where I wanted to. I have always felt this way about Alex Kidd in Miracle World, so those who are used to the original's controls will likely feel right at home here, but for others, just know you might feel a bit put off at first and need to put some time in to understand how Alex operates in the air. Speaking of, during specific sections of specific levels, Alex can buy vehicles for an insanely cheap price with all the money he finds lying around. He can ride a motorcycle through a bunch of obstacles, a boat through the water, and a pedal-operated helicopter to avoid a bunch of obstacles in the sky. These sections are fun and help break up the gameplay, and I actually enjoyed them a lot. But take one hit and the vehicle destroys, stranding you to meekly finish the rest of the level. One time this dropped me down to an underwater section, which was fun, but on the motorcycle levels you can tell they weren't made to be run through. That's not a complaint, but I wish there was an option to give the vehicles another health point. But that does bring up another addition the remake adds though, and it's the one that helped ensure I finished Alex Kidd, instead of getting frustrated with it like in the past. There's an infinite lives tick in the menu, and once enabled you can die and go back to very generous checkpoints as often as you need to. You can't turn it off in that save file once it's on, and it claims to lock out certain trophies and achievements without specifying which ones, but it's this addition that made me finally appreciate Alex Kidd and begin to enjoy it. I won't say that I fully fell in love with the game, but being able to see the entire game in this lovely new vision really did a lot to appeal to me. My issue with the original Miracle World was how easy it is to fall from a height and die from touching an enemy you didn't see, or timing a short-ranged punch just incorrectly and still running it into an enemy I thought I had for sure. Hell, even during the footage I'm showing you, I'm sure you're seeing what appear to be a bunch of dumb deaths, and hey, some of them are dumb, I won't lie. But as someone who didn't grow up with old school hard-as-nails games, it's harder to go back and truly appreciate this design mentality. When you game overed in the original Miracle World, that was truly a game over. You had to start again from the beginning. So this generous infinite lives mode was perfect for me. The old way is still there for series veterans who want that challenge, but the door is firmly open for folks like me to come in and enjoy this game more. Now, I'd be remiss to not mention Jankenteam and Alex Kidd, because if you didn't know, boss fights in Alex Kidd take place via rock, paper, scissors. You guess what your opponent will use and hope to counter them and win best 2 of 3. It's so ridiculous that I can't help but love it on some level. As a pro tip, I think grabbing this item here allowed me to read opponents' minds and see what selection they'll make, which takes the luck factor away entirely for those who want it gone. Now, the first time you encounter Janken the Great's 3 superiors, all you have to do is beat them in a game of Jankenpo to advance, but later on in the game you do have to fight them afterward. Another neat thing this remake does is adjust these boss battles to make them a little more traditional boss fights. Comparing this fight to the Master System version shows that a good amount of care was put into adjusting the fight and incorporating new battle design. I really appreciated it. If you can bring a power bracelet you found or purchased to these fights that let you shoot projectiles, they get really fun. I enjoyed these encounters more than the main stages honestly, and there is a boss rush mode after beating the game if you want a quicker way to get to them. The levels themselves are fine too, honestly. None of them have any particularly egregious or annoying sections when viewed through the lens of infinite lives, aside from one bit near the end of the game that I had to Google. If you ever find yourself swimming in a room full of spikes, simply never press up and you'll survive hitting them? It's odd, but yeah, now you know. I saved you a Google search later. I'm just still conflicted because most of my deaths came from the oddities of the jump physics or just mistiming the incredibly specific window I had for landing punches. If either of these could have been adjusted, tighter jumps or larger attack windows, I think I would have enjoyed the game a lot more. The layout of the levels is fun, simplistic but fun. I know the game would have lost some of its Alex Kidd identity by offering options to address those 2 quirks, and I'm sure for longtime fans who are used to playing the game, neither of those things are an issue in the first place, but I personally would really have loved to be able to toggle some of those things to be tighter and a bit more forgiving. With those changes, I don't think I would have even wanted an infinite life feature. So I guess to summarize, I'm in a weird place with this remake. Underneath it all, it's a prettier version of Alex Kidd in Miracle World that plays pretty faithfully to the original version. I think that's a good thing overall, but I can't help but wish I had the option to make it a bit less faithful. I'll keep playing and try to get more used to it, because it's really the main thing keeping me from truly enjoying this game, instead of enjoying it sometimes. I think this remake makes a lot of improvements and smart changes all in all though. The infinite life toggle is a godsend. The presentation is one of the most charming I've experienced in a while. You can switch held items with the shoulder buttons instead of going into the menu each time now. And I enjoyed the updates to the boss encounters. There are even entirely new levels added here, and you can separately play the original Master System game from the main menu too, if you want a strict comparison of the original versus the remake. And to be clear, this isn't the retro mode that you can toggle to in the remake. This is actually the original game as it was. I'm strictly of the opinion that remakes should include the original incarnation of the game it's adapting whenever possible, so I was incredibly happy to see this remake include it, even if the original game is fairly accessible otherwise. I give major points for that in my book. So do I recommend Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX to newcomers, or those who have tried to like the original game before but couldn't? It depends, but mostly I'm going to say yes. If your issue with the original game was solely a lack of enjoyment, then this new issue of the game won't change that for you. But there's just enough added here that I think it stands the best shot of winning over those crowds. The Sega Ages version of Alex Kidd on the Nintendo Switch did give you a 5-second rewind for the tricky spots, but the new graphics, charming additions like NPCs, and Infinite Lives feature do a lot to make this the way I'd recommend trying the game. I didn't walk away from it loving it, but this did lead me to finally beat Alex Kidd, and I even wanted to play it again after finishing it. This remake is an obvious labor of love from the developers, so even if you just like experiencing things you can tell the creators loved making, this is worth a try for that alone. I'd be interested in seeing them adapt the other Alex Kidd games too, but even if this is all we get, I'm glad this exists. Before now, I'd reconciled with the original game as something I'd always appreciate but never enjoy, so I'm going to count this remake as a win all in all. I'm hoping with more time and more playthroughs I'll come to appreciate it even more, but even if I never do, this was an experience I'm glad I had. A big thanks as always to my Patreon supporters who keep this channel going, particularly Adrian Buckles-Chucklow, Calico Plus, Goldstorm07, Harry, Jeet, Joey, Lewis Jones, Moki, Patrick Thompson, Svandelica, That Trap Guy, The Crazy Even, The Legend of Groose, and Wolf Chaos On. There's a lot of you guys, thank you.